Perfect. All right. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who may not know who I am, my name is Sharon, and I am INRC's Neighborhood Services Director. And so we're so excited. Tonight's info session is Understanding Walkability in Your Neighborhood, which will be facilitated by Taylor. Taylor is the Walk and Bike Program Coordinator with Health by Design. When we surveyed neighbors earlier this calendar year and asked, what topics do neighbors want to learn about? Walkability and sidewalks was definitely one of the topics that we had heard from a few neighbors. So we're really excited to welcome Taylor back into the space. We partnered with Health by Design last year as well for tactical urbanism. So with that, I will keep an eye on the waiting room and continue to let people in as they join. And I will hand it over to Taylor.
Thanks, Sharon. Good evening, everyone. I'm Taylor Firestein. As Sharon mentioned, my title is Walk and Bike Program Coordinator with Health by Design, based here in Indianapolis, although we do work all across Indiana. So I'm excited to be here again to present on similar but new topic for our INRC virtual info sessions. So next slide. This is just a brief overview of what we'll be covering tonight. So I'm going to do kind of a quick introduction into Health by Design and sort of our frame of work and what we do across Indiana. And then some sort of historical context on walkability and walking in Indianapolis specifically. And then I'm going to kind of highlight real quick some challenges that we see today that maybe wasn't around 100 years ago, but over time, based on that historical context, we have challenges that we face today as far as walkability in our city. And then we'll go through some strategies, including tactical urbanism, which I know is really popular right now. And that INRC hosted us last year with Indianapolis DPW to talk about. So I'm going to highlight that as well as a few others. And then the moving forward is kind of what you all, I hope, will be able to take away from this and hopefully positively impact your neighborhoods. And then we'll leave the second half for Q&A. So next slide. And again, thanks. So just a little bit about Health by Design. As I mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization based here in Indianapolis, but we work statewide. We were founded in 2005, so still sort of a newer organization. We've grown quite a bit over the last few years, adding staff. So I think we're at about 10 people now. And really our core programming areas that we're really invested in is walking, biking, transit, and land use, and how those all come together to support active living. And active living is kind of generally the freedom to choose your personal mode of transportation, to be able to move to your daily destinations, whether that's school or church or work. And having that ability to do so safely and conveniently and comfortably. Next slide. So this diagram is called the social ecological model. And so I'm going to try to keep it kind of high level so we don't lose people. But the basis for this is basically that the choices people make are driven by the choices that they have available to them. So the work of Health by Design is grounded in this model. It's a theory-based framework, and it's often used to understand public health and health behavior of your interpersonal kind of health behavior, and how and the model recognizes how so many factors at all sorts of different levels really interact to influence those health outcomes. And so those factors are shaped by, public policy, systems of power and oppression, community, institutional and neighborhood assets or barriers, and then of course, your friendships, familial relationships, and individual characteristics. So the model explains an increasingly understood reality that our zip code is more important than our genetic code in determining how well and how long we live. Next slide. And so this is just another kind of quote that really sums up that idea. So this is really kind of the perfect place and where health by design sort of fits in, where we're looking at those kind of place-based built environment impacts that we all are influenced by, that influences our health and our behaviors. Next slide. So this is just a newer graphic from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that we've started using, that kind of shows the difference between quality and equity. So for a long time, we would talk about equality as sort of this guiding principle. But in reality, what we're really meaning is equity. We want everyone to have what they need in understanding their barriers and their different circumstances and different conditions. Whereas equality is just sort of everyone gets the same thing. So in this image, you can see there's, the sidewalk, and there's some signage to show drivers, pedestrians might be crossing, but it doesn't totally take into account all the different needs of those pedestrians. So you can see in the second image under equity, there's a curb ramp and, the ability for people of different ages and different abilities to cross the street. And you even have like an audible and visual signal there to help people who may have, hearing, hard of hearing, or other obstacles. So health equity just means generally that everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be healthier. So this requires removing obstacles to health, such as poverty, discrimination, and those consequences including powerlessness, lack of access to good jobs with fair pay, quality education, housing, transportation options, etc. So that's a lot. Those are really big problems that we face as a society. But really, Health by Design's focus is on that transportation health equity lens. Next slide. So now we're going to dive in a little bit into the history of our walking here in Indianapolis, and sort of the conditions that we're now in, that our history has brought us to. So next slide. This is a really nice image that I like to show of kind of like that sort of perfect middle ground, where in Indianapolis, the Cultural Trail provides that really beautiful, comfortable, convenient space for people who live or work or play downtown. And it's a really nice kind of visually, aesthetically pleasing walkway and cycle or bicycle way. And so this is sort of like I would say, if we could have like a cultural trail on every street, that would be the best, right? So it accommodates everyone, including motorists. But we know having all of that infrastructure is also really expensive. And so that's something we can really kind of our guiding star, like this is our moonshot. We would really love for all of this, but the reality is that budget constraints and environmental constraints, we have to sort of temper our expectations on what sort of infrastructure we can provide for people. Next slide. Just going to define a few key terms here. I'm not going to read them word for word, but some terms that we often use that maybe most folks aren't familiar with are complete streets. So these are streets that really have all of the sort of principles that allow everyone of all ages and abilities, no matter their mode, to comfortably and conveniently get to where they need to go. So a complete street might have sidewalks and bike lanes and a bus stop that has a shelter to keep people out of the elements. And so we'll get more into complete streets a little later. Tactical urbanism, which I already mentioned, this is low cost and temporary installations, and they're usually intended to calm traffic or enhance safety on streets. These are usually implemented as sort of a first step in testing a new idea or a new design within a street, with the goal of having a permanent installation put into place at a later time. And then walkability. It's very generally, walkability is just the accessibility of different amenities or daily destinations by foot. Some people say 15 minutes, 15-minute walk is good. Some say 20, some say 30. So it's a really nebulous kind of word that can mean different things to different people. But the way that we kind of see walkability is that it just offers you, again, that comfortable, convenient mode to get where you need to go, whether that is walking by foot or using a mobility device, whatever it be, that there are no barriers and great safety for people to get where they need to go on foot. Next slide. And so a little bit of a history lesson. So this kind of small map that you see here is actually based on the city of Indianapolis and how they designate different areas of the city based on the built environment. So the gray area, dark gray that you see, is called the compact context area. And basically, this is the oldest part of Indianapolis, the part that developed first. Usually the streets are, follow a grid. Most of these streets also have sidewalks, and they're more higher density. So there's more apartment buildings and more, if you think of like the streetcars, 50, 60, 70 years ago, sort of those little commercial nodes in those neighborhoods where people could just get off on the streetcar, pick up some things at the grocery store, and then walk home a couple blocks. So that's really the gist of sort of the compact context area. Oh, I forgot to mention, this is very closely aligns with the city's incorporated limits up until 1969. So for those of you who are history buffs or have lived here a while, you'll know in 1970, that's when UNIGOV, the Unified City County Government, went into effect in Indianapolis. So that basically expanded all of the city into Marion County. So all of that light gray area then became part of the city. Next slide. And so you can see in this image, again, the same map, but then focusing on the light gray area. This is called the metro context area. And this is the area of the city that mostly developed after UNIGOV, or in 1970 and afterward. And so this image here is of Girls School Road on the city's west side. And you'll notice someone there walking. There aren't any sidewalks. There isn't even a shoulder. And out in the distance, you can see some signage from businesses that this person may have been walking to. And then on the right-hand side, there's some fences. You can tell there's a suburban or a subdivision off to the right. And so it's in urban planning terms, we would say these are really segregated land uses. So you have the neighborhood that's kind of tucked away from the street and sort of separate, like an island. And then you have this really busy street that only accommodates motor vehicles. And then, those commercial areas that are also sort of islands to themselves and really only accommodate people who are driving there. So this is, and these are general observations. This isn't necessarily seen everywhere in the metro context area of Indy. There are a lot of areas in the city that do look a lot better than this image. But it's just an example of kind of what we see when you get out of that more urban context here, or denser context area. Next slide. So just sort of bringing it to, I would say, the last 10 or so years, 10 to 15 years, the city has recognized that there are a lot of deficiencies in our pedestrian network and sidewalks and trails. And so a lot of planning efforts have been underway in the last decade. So you can see Indianapolis's first complete streets ordinance was adopted in 2012 and then updated last year. And then we had the Indianapolis-Marion County Pedestrian Plan, which Health by Design provided technical support to the city on. And of course, the Indy Moves Transportation Plan and Thrive Indianapolis, which is the sustainability plan, also included elements of the built environment and walkability. And then this sort of layered image that you see on the right is actually all of the different layers that went into the pedestrian plan to identify those priorities for improving and enhancing walkability in the city. So there's a lot that could be a whole other presentation just on the pedestrian plan. So if anyone has any really specific questions, I'm more than happy to answer those here at the end, or we can also talk offline as well. And then, yeah, thank you. Next slide to the Walkability Champion Program. I'm just going to highlight this real quick. This is something that Health by Design has also been doing over the last 10 years. This map on the right is a little outdated now, but basically over the last 10 years, we used data from police reports that were collected in Marion County, and we're able to map and analyze those crashes to show where they're occurring and what kind of crashes are occurring across the city. And so it's a little difficult to see because it's a small map, but you'll see some grayed areas, and those are areas that were designated as high crash zones in the city. So that's where there are such a high number of pedestrian crashes occurring within that area that it's what's the word? It is worse than what you would expect given the normal trend over time. And so with those zones, we did some targeted public engagement and some several walk audits throughout the city in those zones. And we'll talk a little bit about walk audits as well. But really the major takeaway here is that of the roughly 400 square miles of Marion County, those 16 crash zones only account for about 24 square miles. So almost half of all the pedestrian crashes that have occurred in Indy over the last 10 years only happen in about 7% of the land area. So what that tells us is even with the finite amount of money that we need, all of those areas can really benefit from some major investments in walking for walkability and safety infrastructure investments. So just in that very small area, we could make a really big difference is really the main takeaway there. Next slide. And then really quickly, I wanted to highlight the REACH program. And I saw my colleague Armika Bash-Gaspar is online this evening, and she is our REACH program coordinator. And so REACH stands for Racial and Ethnic Approaches to Community Health. And it's funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and supported locally by Health by Design in the Marion County Public Health Department. And so this map here just shows generally where that REACH zone is. There are a few crash zones within that REACH area, but basically through this grant, REACH recipients plan and carry out local culturally appropriate programs to address a range of health issues, mostly among minority groups, so Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, American Indian, etc. And so Armika works directly with community members on the near northeast side, especially with concerns around walkability and pedestrian safety, and also helps build capacity for community connectedness and improving active living. And Armika, if I left anything out, please do include it in the chat for people. Next slide. So now moving on to some of the challenges that we face. Next slide. So I really, this is actually, this image that you see is sort of hard to decipher, but it's central Indiana. And it's actually, because this is a PDF that we're sharing, you can't see it, but it's actually a GIF, and it shows the changes over time in where people are living. So it's the bands of development over time. So the image that you see there is the actual like 1930s and earlier built environment. And it obviously expanded much more since the 1930s, and now starts to cover, you know, Hamilton County and Hendricks County outside of Indianapolis proper. So really the whole point of sharing this is to really think about the challenges that our land use patterns have created these barriers for people, especially those who can't drive or don't own a car and have to rely on transit, which we know, as much as Indigo has been doing amazing work expanding that network, it still unfortunately leaves so many people out of you know, getting to those jobs outside of Marion County. So that's just one aspect. Next slide. And then kind of in addition to that, thinking about, again, that consolidated city county and how Indianapolis is so large land area wise compared to similar large American cities. It really helps make it so that it's so easy for people to continue driving, and the habit that we have of, so a lot of the cities that are shown there in comparison have a lot of geographic constraints, whether those are mountains or water bodies, and for better or for worse, Indianapolis sort of sits in this you know, grand Midwest prairie, where we could kind of just endlessly develop with, you know, almost no constraints. And so that's allowed people to develop agricultural land pretty extensively, especially in the latter half of the 20th century and into the 21st century. And so as as driving has become sort of the norm in the last 50 or 60 years, investment has shifted gradually at the local level, where the state of Indiana now invests heavily in highways and road expansions and other car-oriented infrastructure, under the kind of assumption that all growth is good growth, but we should really be much smarter in how we plan our land use and development. Next slide. And then another major challenge that I'm sure everyone is very well aware of is the funding and deferred maintenance issues that are so problematic here, not only in Indianapolis, but in many counties across Indiana. And I just wanted to highlight of this infographic that was provided on the right by the city of Indianapolis, highlighted the total cost estimated to repair and complete the sidewalk network in Marion County, would be about $7.2 billion with a B, which is not anything that we can ever conceivably come up with, at least in my lifetime. So with that being such a challenge, that presents the opportunity then to really focus in on the existing infrastructure that we have and how can we kind of relatively cheaply or more affordably reallocate road space to include trails or sidewalks or shoulders even, to help improve safety for pedestrians and bicyclists and others as well. But the need is just so great that unfortunately the city is forced really to prioritize what areas get those investments year over year. Next slide. And then moving on to some strategies here. So I'm going to highlight, like I said at the beginning, just a few, what we refer to as the 3 Ps: policies, programs, and projects. So I'm going to highlight a few that hopefully you all can sort of take in, mold to your needs in your neighborhoods, or even partner with other organizations who have similar goals in improving walkability. So next slide. So this table is, I'm not going to read through all of them, but this is just kind of a good reference for later when you want to, read back on some of these ideas and kind of the differences between them. So policies, really high level, they're more permanent or fixed. So when we talk about policies, we're usually talking about something like a complete streets ordinance, which I mentioned Indianapolis adopted in 2012. And as part of that ordinance, sidewalks are required in all new developments. So that helps to sort of reframe the way that we were building for a couple generations, where we weren't considering, people who were needing to get where they needed to go outside of a vehicle. So it wasn't until 2012 that became a requirement for all new development. Programs, these are maybe long-term or ongoing, but wanted to highlight another one that sort of goes hand in hand with tactical urbanism, which is creative placemaking. So creative placemaking is, you can think of it too as sort of like sprucing up your street, especially if you have like an example I'll share later, excess parking, or maybe you have really wide streets in your neighborhood that don't get very much traffic. You can use tactical urbanism and creative placemaking to sort of reallocate that extra pavement space into, something like temporary seating or something, or you could do, the city has an art in the right of way policy. So maybe a mural could be painted on the edges of the street to help sort of give the visual the visual cue that the street is narrower and requires people to drive slower. So that's just another example. And then a project. So we'll definitely dive into tactical urbanism as like a singular project, and also walk audits and assessments. Next slide. And so this is another image that was actually a GIF, so I can't show it to you in person, but it shows just the expansion over time across the United States of complete streets policies being adopted. And so they've become increasingly commonplace throughout the country, and basically, like I mentioned, ensure that new construction of transportation infrastructure fully considers all roadway users, regardless of their mode of transportation. So generally, complete streets guidelines require sidewalks and crosswalks for pedestrians, curb ramps that can be easily negotiated by persons who require mobility aid. Side paths are protected bike lanes for cyclists, and even narrower lanes for motor vehicles to help slow people down when they're driving. And basically, complete streets policies are adopted at all sorts of levels of government. So there's municipal, county, metropolitan planning organization, which Indianapolis is a part of, and even state departments of transportation. So INDOT also has a complete streets ordinance for the roads within its jurisdiction. Next slide. And this is just a kind of fun graphic that one of my colleagues, Marjorie Hennessy, created, that just starts to sort of pick apart all the elements of what a complete street is. And so not every complete street is going to have all of these elements, but this is a really good sort of visual of what all is included. Next slide. And then this is another just sort of a visual graphic of what complete streets are. So oftentimes you may hear of a road diet or right sizing roadways. So right sizing refers to streets that are redesigned to reallocate space to accommodate multiple modes of transportation. And so this may occur due to changing land use patterns or economic conditions. So you can think of, 50 years ago when a road was built to the standards on the left, maybe there was a major factory that had a lot of employees that came and go at certain times of day. And so they really needed that extra volume space on the roadway to accommodate folks. But maybe that factory went out of business 20 years ago. And so now that road is just like, it's an empty, very wide, very uncomfortable street. And so with right sizing under like a complete streets ordinance, this is sort of what that road could look like, to reallocate that space to make it more comfortable for all road users, including motorists. You can kind of think of Central Avenue that the city redesigned, I believe in 2018 or 2019, sort of between the Old North Side and Fall Creek. So that stretch of Central Avenue was redesigned to make the lanes a little thinner or narrower, and include, bump outs and ADA compliant curb ramps, and just overall makes the street much more comfortable for all users. Next slide. And then this is just an example here, this one in Pittsburgh. Next slide. And now, as far as tactical urbanism, which oftentimes you'll also hear like temporary demonstration project, they're kind of used interchangeably, but these are just a few examples from around the Midwest. Here in Indiana, Fort Wayne and South Bend have done a lot of really great tactical urbanism projects. You can see the one in Fort Wayne there, they actually used excess street parking to create bike parking for people. There's actually an ice cream shop just behind where the photo was taken. So allowing people to park their bikes outside. And then in South Bend, they did a pop-up traffic circle at a really wide intersection, but at a low traffic street. So again, another way to slow people down in this residential neighborhood. Next slide. And then I really love this project. This one, again, is in Fort Wayne, but the Columbia Avenue Better Block project. This was a partnership that was done with the neighborhood, the city of Fort Wayne, and AARP Indiana. This is what this intersection looked like. It's really a thoroughfare between a residential neighborhood and downtown Fort Wayne. So this is what it looked like in 2017. And then next slide. This was part of a visioning exercise to see, how that street space could be reallocated to make it more, aesthetically pleasing, more comfortable for all modes, and support local business in the neighborhood. And so next slide. A few months later, this is what they came up with. So it allowed the city to explore a few different solutions. So it included a painted bike lane, curb extensions, artistic crosswalks, which I do want to note, artistic crosswalks are not permitted in Indianapolis, but in some cities they are. So just a note of that. But really, the whole point is sort of, for people who are driving through the neighborhood, it forces them to slow down. It's sort of eye-catching. It's sort of a statement piece for the neighborhood. So again, gets at that creative placemaking. And it was led by neighborhood residents and partners at Active Transportation Coalition in Fort Wayne, as well as the Indiana Department of Health. And then beginning in the last few years, the city has now moved to make some of these changes permanent. So it has largely been successful and even helped spur a new coffee shop there on the left-hand side in what was a previously vacant business front. Next slide. And then walk audits. As I mentioned, this is maybe a first step. If this is sort of a new project for you or your neighbors, if this is something that you all feel very passionate about, but maybe you just don't know where to start, I would suggest starting with a walk audit or walk assessment. So Health by Design traditionally had always done sort of a paper form. We have started gradually moving to a smartphone app-based walk audit form. And it really makes it much easier. So when you're taking a picture with your phone, it can actually attach the coordinates to it. And you can type up your comments rather than sort of trying to write in maybe chicken scratch handwriting while you're out on a busy corner where it's loud and maybe overwhelming. However, as a starting place, the AARP walk audit toolkit, which I included an image there of, is a really great example that I would suggest using. And then there's kind of a top 10 tips that I've included here as well. The image on the bottom is actually from a walk audit that Health by Design helped lead with the Indiana Department of Health and the city of Gary last August, I believe, as part of an active living workshop. So, they're pretty variable, as much ground as you want to cover, different times of day. There's all sorts of different, things that can go into what you want to get out of a walk audit. So again, I'm happy to talk to people offline if they want to learn more specifics about walk audits and how it might apply to their neighborhood. And then the last one I want to mention here is the Indianapolis Neighborhood Infrastructure Partnership, or INIP. So some of you may have heard of this, but the INIP program is a matching grant program that's offered by the Indy DPW. So applicants are required to provide a 50% match, and eligible applicants are usually have typically been neighborhood associations or community development corporations. I know a few school districts have even gotten involved, especially I think MSD Wayne Township has matched funds to help put in a trail near one of their properties. And so that's just kind of a brief rundown. When I'll share the slideshow in an actual PowerPoint so that you can click on the image, which will lead to a WRTV article on the 2023 awardees, so you can learn a little bit more about that. And then there's also a link to the 2023 applicant eligibility and all of that. So you'll be able to read up on that. Next slide. So moving forward, this is where the you can hit the road on all that you can do in what's in your power to help influence walkability in your neighborhood. So next slide. Where to start? So for those who are living in Indianapolis, connecting with your city county councilor is one of the very first things that you can do. That would be, greatly beneficial. I know they're very busy people, our city county councilors, but they really do listen and take note of those particular infrastructure issues that are in your neighborhood. Those concerns that are brought to their attention, I know definitely weigh on their minds during budget season when they're putting together the budget for DPW the following year. So it is very, very important to connect with them and build a relationship with them. And again, there's a link there to find your city county councilor. And then as well as contacting your mayor's neighborhood advocate, which I know they were here at the last virtual info session that INRC hosted. So definitely tag teaming your city county councilor and your MNA are probably the most beneficial ways to make sure that any concerns that you have around walkability or infrastructure generally are brought to their attention is going to be really beneficial. And then of course, submitting service requests online via Request Indy. You can either do that online where there's a link there, or you can download the Request Indy mobile app for your smartphone. And there are options for you to actually request specifically service on an existing sidewalk or a crosswalk, or even like a pedestrian signal that maybe isn't working. So there's all sorts of different options there in the menu within Request Indy to report those. And then, of course, calling the Mayor's Action Center by phone is also an option. And then I've also included Indigo information as well. I know Indigo is in the midst of a multi-year project, basically upgrading their bus stops to make them more safe for people, especially people who need a mobility device. So building sidewalks at least to their station, having a bus pad there for people so they're not waiting, in the mud if there's not a sidewalk, or in a ditch on the side of the road. So they are definitely making investments and improving walkability to and from their bus stops. Next slide. And if you're interested in learning more, there's no there's no lack of resources. There's so much information out there. It was the biggest challenge for me coming into this presentation was trying to distill it all down because there is so much. So I've included a bunch of links here from national resources with a focus on walkability and active living, so you can learn more there. And then Health by Design also has an Indiana Active Living Guidebook, which we have copies of. And if anyone would be interested in receiving one of those for free, you can also contact me, and I'll have my email up here in the next slide. And with that, I think I will go ahead and open it up for Q&A. Really quickly, I do want to mention, Sharon, if you actually go to the next slide, you can see this was mostly for me. So nobody needs to read this. Don't even attempt it. These are all the questions from you all that were submitted when you registered for this event. So for the most part, we have answers to all of those questions, but for time's sake and not being repetitive, I'm going to go ahead and put these all into a Word document at a font that is actually legible, and have Sharon send that out with the presentation here after this event. So and with that, we can go ahead and open it up to Q&A.
So I thank you so much, Taylor. I'm actually going to let another person in. So I wanted to let everyone know because I know some of you are on your phones and you may not be able to see the chat. I will make sure to send everyone who registered for the info session the presentation. We'll figure out a way to get it with links in a document that's not too big to send via email. So we'll figure out a way to get that out to everyone. But yes, want to open it up to anyone who has any questions for Taylor around anything that was covered, or maybe something that wasn't covered, but that you think Taylor may have some information on.
Hi, Taylor. I'm Bethany, and I live in Little Flower, and we have submitted a KIB grant for a green space. So fingers crossed. I don't know yet what that will look like. Even if that grant doesn't come together this year, there would still be things that we would want to do around walkability and active and that type of thing. So my question for you is, are you somebody that can come talk to a community meeting, a community gathering in a neighborhood? And if yes, do you have suggestions at this point, just off the cuff, on topics, or is that something we might be able to talk about offline? I'm just curious what your experience has been and what has been a hit with community groups, neighborhood groups.
Yeah, definitely. So we actually, I would say most recently, we've worked with the Christian Park neighborhood organization, also on the Near East Side. And we actually did a walk audit with them. They had requested that we do a walk audit. And I think it was last May. So it's only been over the last year. that we were out there with them, and they showed us some really specific intersections that were troublesome. And then we sort of compiled everything, the pictures, the notes, questions that they had that we couldn't answer that went to DPW, and we compiled it all into sort of a summary report for them. And then I think it was maybe last October, I came to their one of their monthly meetings and just gave a high level presentation and sort of expectations. But yeah, I would be more than happy to talk more about this with you all offline and see if there's something that we could do for Community Heights.
Or even Little Flower.
Or Little Flower, sorry, Community Heights came to mind, and I was like, that's not what she said.
But
Yes,
no,
Little
but we
Flower.
actually do some things with Community Heights, so it might make good sense to do a combined effort with the two neighborhoods. So
Yeah, I know they're working on a tactical urbanism project too over in Community Heights, so that's why they were top of mind. But Little Flower, I won't forget Little Flower.
it's a good group over there too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I know I had a question actually around the artistic crosswalks. So I'm curious, does that mean that no crosswalks can be painted, or that you can paint crosswalks, but there's a specific style that's allowed?
So it's my understanding, so I may be a little wrong, but hopefully I got this right. The city of Indianapolis does not want anyone painting anything crosswalk wise. Especially no on the artistic crosswalks. So some cities, basically to give a high level sort of explanation, so there are federal requirements to road markings. So that's why, we have the yellow kind of dotted center line and the white solid lines, and all of those things that we all know instinctively because their tradition, they're legislated here. So we all are, we understand what they are. One of those requirements are around the way that crosswalks are designed. And so if someone were to paint a crosswalk with like purple paint or something like that, it is possible, the way that it's interpreted, it could be an illegal crosswalk that the city could get in trouble for, if because it's not living up to the standards of set forth in what's called the MUTCD, which is the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And so some cities have interpreted it differently, like Fort Wayne, where they don't see it as the liability that other cities have. And so at least in Indianapolis, artistic crosswalks or even painting what would be like a standard crosswalk is not eligible. However, you are able to request a new or painted crosswalk via request Indy or the MAC, and it'll be added to their list to get installed. But yeah, no artistic crosswalks, not in Marion County.
Taylor, we do have a couple questions in the chat. So one is around, I think Bethany was saying around the can, that there's some painting over there, which now I want to go over and see it, to see what maybe could qualify. Because I know also Community Heights is doing painting of bike lanes. So I know they're right. So it's like figuring out like, what is it that folks can and can't do. This is a selfish question, because in my neighborhood, cars fly through our neighborhood. And so someone had asked about speed bumps, and I had actually heard speed bumps don't slow cars down because they just speed up in between the speed bumps. And so then I had heard, well, maybe painting was a good way to slow people down. So just trying to figure it out. but I'll continue to work on that as well. Then there's one, and it said, any suggestions on how we might deter cars from parking over the curb and on sidewalks?
Well, first I'll go back to Bethany's question on the can
Oh, do you know?
intersection. Yeah, so they actually applied for a tactical urbanism grant from the Indiana Department of Health a couple of years ago. And it wasn't a crosswalk, but it was a mural that was different colors and kind of, I'm like envisioning it, but it's hard to describe. But it was a really kind of artistic mural. And really I think their goal behind it was that painting this really vibrant design in the road, they were going to test it out as a way to see if it had any impact on drivers taking that turn really quickly right there at that intersection and seeing if it would slow drivers down. So I don't know what what the findings were of that, but they got approval from the city of Indianapolis for that, because it fit the requirements of the art in the right of way policy, which I can also make sure to share a link, Sharon, for you to share out with everybody. But
yes, art in the right way. I couldn't quite get there. Yep. Okay.
Clever
Perfect.
art in the right way. Yeah.
And then to Michelle's question, that is a major problem that I've noticed more and more lately. Cars parking on sidewalks, especially a lot of older streets have the rolled curbs, which make it that much easier for people to just like come up onto the sidewalks and park their vehicles. I don't have any immediate suggestions. I have been told that when you do see a vehicle parked that way, to report it. I believe like the IMPD non-emergency number, and you might want to have like their license plate available too, because people can be fined for that. They should not be doing that in any circumstance. But as far as, suggestions on deterring people from doing it in the first place, I don't really know, because you can't, my first thought is like, well, you could put like potted plants out there or something, but then you're blocking the sidewalk for people that might need it for, if they need a wheelchair to get through. And so, sorry, not really a great answer for that.
Any last questions? Even if it's a question that you asked in the registration, that you want to kind of have a conversation about, we can open it up. Otherwise, we can start to wrap up the session.
I live in Eden Village, which is 56 in Georgetown Road. We have a couple of older communities that were built on the corner right by Chase Bank, and then there's another one right behind it. What I see is a lot of people in wheelchairs trying to get across the street to go like to General Dollar or anything that's even around the corner. For some reason, when they did 56th Street and they did the infrastructure of the sidewalks, on some areas, they only did one side of the sidewalk. And I really don't, I'm really kind of confused about why that is. But would this be the same place that I would come to put in a request through our neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods to get something done about this? Because we literally have older people, some of them I'm assuming can't afford electric wheelchairs, so they're actually scooting themselves across the street.
What you said, Georgetown and 56th?
Yes, sir.
Just for my clarification, when did they add that sidewalk? Do you know roughly?
They redid 56th Street maybe 5 years ago, I want to say.
Okay.
And it's very scattered the way that they did the sidewalk along 56th Street. For some reason, you literally have to cross the street at some points to be able to use the sidewalk to even get down to Eagle Creek.
Okay, I see. I'm looking it up right now just to get
Oh,
a
got
better
you.
visual.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I would say definitely contacting your city county councilor
Okay.
about that. I would think too, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look it up for you. In the Indy Moves plan, they do have sort of a short list of projects that they anticipate funding over the next several years, and it is possible that that stretch of roadway might be included, but I would have to look that up to be sure. And if it's not, then I would look at the pedestrian plan, because I'm wondering if this area might fall within one of those priority areas that the plan identified. And then I feel like that would help your case immensely to your counselor that this is it's in a priority area
Right, right.
plan. So I mean
That's,
it
I'm sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say, I mean, looking at it just from like Google Maps, it definitely seems to me like that would be a priority area because of all the
It's a lot of traffic
yeah.
along these streets, and they're actually going to be adding 2 apartment buildings in the smaller in the field that's right, like you might see a dental office there. Well, they're going to be adding some apartment buildings there very soon. Apparently this guy just brought the land, so they just recently had a meeting about that, so it's going to bring even more fun and excitement to the area.
Um, do you happen to have or you can maybe message me privately if you want to share your email address and I can follow up with you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I actually took down your email address, and I
Oh,
will
great.
email you right after this. That sounds good?
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, well, that might be a good note to end on. I appreciate everyone spending your evening with us, and also all the questions that we got ahead of time. And as I promised, I will share the recording, the link for the recording. So if you want to share the recording or sit down with someone else and kind of think through what your next steps are when it comes to walkability, what you're really passionate about. And then I will also email out the presentation. So I appreciate you all, Taylor. I appreciate the partnership with Health by Design and all the work that everyone does to make Indianapolis a better and safer community. So thank you all for spending your evening with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good one. Thanks, everybody.